Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Gay Keene, and I'm here to welcome you to the Animus Museum's second Saturday seminar series for November. Before we start our talk today, a little Zoom housekeeping. We are using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you are all muted and your videos are off. At the bottom of your screen, you may need to mouse down to see it. There are some icons. If you have immediate issues or questions, please click on the Q&A. Guru will be monitoring that at all times. At the end of the talk, we will have time for your questions, but we will wait till the end to answer them. Or at the end, you can put up your hand, click on your little hand, and we will allow you to unmute and ask your question. This session is being recorded, and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording. Susan Jones will be monitoring again and leading the question and answer time at the end. If there was a who's who of Durango women, Judith Reynolds would be among the most prominent. With a background in art history, she is well known in Durango as a Fort Lewis professor, founder of the Lifelong Learning Series, speaker, journalist, cartoonist, and co-author of Nordenski of Mesa, Verde. Judith has a list of honors and awards too long, or we would not have just an hour-long webinar. Judith, and over the years, has helped edit our newsletter. The Animus Museum is delighted to have Judith with us here today to present The Baron of Mesa Verde. It is my honor to introduce Judith Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Gay, for that rather flowery introduction. A bit more than necessary here. And I want to express my thanks to both you and Susan for including me in the Saturday seminar series here at the Animus Museum. It's my pleasure to be here to tell the story of Gustaf Nordenski. He was here in 1891 and put Mesa Verde on the dwelling. Creating a museum is ironic because he was not a baron at all, but locals who objected to him being here decided and derided him as an outsider, a foreigner, a European for all things, whom they claimed was cutting into their black market in Native American artifacts. He was arrested and jailed on suspicion of all of that, and that's the story that will unfold today. The graphic you're looking at has three components. On the left is a formal portrait of Gustaf, would you believe, at age 24. In those days, adults look like adults. He looks like he's 45. Durango portrait of Gustaf at age 23, the age he was. For the portraits is one of the letters that he wrote to his father while he was here. You'll see all three of these images or graphics in a moment. Now, here we go. Here is Gustaf, a young man, recent graduate of the University of Uppsala in 1887. And I'm telling you here in answer to the question, who was he? He was the Swedish scientist who put Mesa Verde on the international map. And underneath that, I have a quote from Robert Hyder, former superintendent of Mesa Verde National Park. I interviewed him for the book that we wrote about GN, as I refer to him. And Robert Hyder said to us, "I shudder to think what Mesa Verde would be today had there been no Gustaf Nordenski." By the way, his last name is almost impossible for a non-Swedish speaking person to pronounce. It means Northern Shield. And the closest I've come to a pronunciation that would be acceptable to a Swede is Nordenskiöld. That's the best I can do. Here's the outline of what we're going to do today. We will be addressing a little bit more about who Gustaf was and why we're talking about his presence in the American Southwest, when he was here, why he was called or derided as the Baron, and his legacy. And here's this picture taken in Stockholm in 1890, in a winter fur coat, dramatic mustache, glasses, etc. Of course, the where of all of this is our country here, Mesa Verde and the Colorado Plateau. This is a relatively current photograph that I think is beautiful, that sets out the flatness of Mesa Verde and the flatness of the Colorado Plateau. And just to further locate us, you can all find us in Durango in the Four Corners area. Mesa Verde is only something like 36 miles from my house, driving over there, an absolutely gorgeous drive, and then a gorgeous switchback drive up to the top of Mesa Verde and all the cliff dwellings. Now, Gustaf, I'll trace why he came here, but there's a key connection that brought him to Durango and brought him to Mancos and brought him to Mesa Verde. And the connection was in Denver. It was a chance encounter, purely by accident, that led to him coming down here. And here are the 5 Wetherill boys, and those of you that live here in the area know all about them. They're seated left to right, Al seated, Winslow standing, Richard in the center, the oldest, Clayton and John. The photograph was taken in 1893. They were all friends of Gustaf. They called him Gus, by the way. And they all worked for him as he was completing his expedition here. The end product for his studies of the cliff dwellings was this book that I've imposed on the right, The Cliff Dwellers of the Mesa Verde. His name is up at the top, and you'll notice that the book's title is in English. It was published in Swedish and in English in Sweden. We happen to be very lucky because there is an original copy up at the Center of Southwest Studies. So you can go up. It's an oversized book with absolutely beautiful graphs, beautiful maps, and tons of Gustaf's wonderful photographs. The photograph that is at the base of this image is his photograph, one of many, of Cliff Palace. He had several large scale cameras, glass plate photography. So the detail is absolutely extraordinary. He had a wonderful eye for composition. So if you haven't been up to the Center of Southwest Studies to see the original copy of this book, please do so. You have to make a reservation and go through all of that, but it's a rarity and it's wonderful that we have it here. Well, those are the end, that's the end product, is the publication of that scientific study. So now we're going to really look at who was this young man. He had his own little signature there, the G and the N, and he was born on June 29th, 1868. That's the photograph of him as a student at the University of Uppsala. He graduated in 3.5 years. He was younger than most people. He was going to start graduate studies. Tell you about that in a minute. I'm going to apologize for way too much text on this slide, and I'm going to probably read much of it. It's very important to know that young Gustaf was the son of Adolf Erik Nordenski. His dates are there in the bottom, and that's an engraving of the father from one of the many books that he published. Adolf Erik was a mineralogist and famed Swedish explorer. He went on 12 Arctic expeditions. He was the very first explorer to navigate the Northeast Passage through the Bering Straits and circumnavigate the Asian continent. When he returned after a year-long voyage in which they were stranded on the ice for months because they didn't quite anticipate the weather conditions that they ran into, and they didn't hear from them for months at a time. But in the ship titled the Verde, is still celebrated in Sweden, and it's April 24th. They returned on this massive and very important voyage in 1880. And young Gustaf and his mother and his siblings were there to greet their very famous father. As a result of his 10 explorations into the Arctic and Greenland, the father was given a title by the King of Sweden, and the title is Friherre, and that means Baron. It happens to mean Baron, and it's an honorific title. The King of Sweden gave it to Adolf Erik. It was his until his death, and then it did pass. Again, it's an honorary title. It passed to the eldest son, and it would have passed to Gustaf had Gustaf outlived his father. I just want to plant this. We're going to come back to the legacy of this remarkable family. 2 Nobel Prize winners in this family, etc. And Gustaf was a part of that great stream. There's another important family connection, the Finnish-Swede connection. Gustaf was the grandson of Niels Gustaf Nordenski, who was a mineralogist and the chief of Finnish mining in his lifetime. Young Gustaf, our subject for today, was also first cousin to the Field Marshal Gustaf Mannerheim, father of Finland, its first president. It's George Washington. And it's a Finnish-Swede family, which is interesting to those of us that like to go into the weeds of biography. I'm not going to get in there today, but he was first cousin to the president of Finland and the father of Finland. So here is Gustaf's education. The picture of him shows him in military uniform because there was compulsory military service in Sweden in the 1880s and 90s. I mentioned that he graduated from the University of Uppsala on December 12th, 1889 in mineralogy and geology. Then he served a year compulsory military service, rather handsome young man in his uniform there. And at the end of his military service, he designed an expedition, a polar expedition in his father's footsteps to Spitsbergen. And there was talk about him being the centerpiece of a possible expedition to Antarctica. His father was already raising money and funds to have that happen, and it did not happen, and you'll learn why. Here's a map of Spitsbergen for all of us who once upon a time never knew where it was. The Swedish name is Svalbard, and it is north of Sweden and Norway, very close and like half inside the Arctic Circle. It's a collection of islands way, 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 way up high. There are research posts there and there are towns there now. Young Gustaf, this was his first serious scientific expedition, and he designed it. He was the head of the research. He went with 3 college friends. They had a very good time. They climbed Mount Nordenski, which was named after his father, etc. They collected phosphate and rocks and this and that and the other thing, and planned to come home from that expedition and write about it and publish their articles. They paid a whaling ship to accommodate them. So they traveled up into the Arctic Circle on an old whaler and had to participate in chores and all that kind of thing. And unfortunately, upon the return, when Gustaf and his 2 college friends were going to plot out the publications they were going to write, he discovered that he had contracted tuberculosis on the whaling ship, close quarters etc. And if you know anything about the history of medicine and the history of tuberculosis in the 19th century, if you essentially was a death sentence, there was no recovering, there was no cure, there were no treatments for TB. He was diagnosed, and this is a picture of Gustaf lower left with his sister Maya. She looks as if she's ill, and she was. She died of tuberculosis on May 16th, 1886. And it was such a trauma in the family that they lost one of their children to tuberculosis, that when young Gustaf was diagnosed, he and his father made a pact that they were not going to reveal that to the mother. And in all the letters that Gustaf wrote home on his various travels, and I'll talk about that in a second, he wrote separately to everyone in this family. He wrote to his father, a colleague, and to his that he was in good health. She never knew until much later. Because of his serious diagnosis, there was one German physician who was studying tuberculosis carefully, Dr. Robert Koch in Berlin. He had developed a serum to be injected as a possible treatment for tuberculosis. The only other quote unquote cure that was available at the time was the travel cure. Get out of the moist, cold climate you live in, go to a dry, warm place. That's about the best that they could do at the time. Well, this diagnosis meant that there was a complete change in plans. Gustaf was going to go to graduate school, continue his studies in mineralogy and geology, and plan more expeditions, but that wasn't going to happen. But he did go to Berlin, and he received these serum treatments, experimental, mind you, like COVID, before it was approved by the CDC. He was a part of an experimental program to see if that happened to him, and he was under the direct supervision of Dr. Robert Koch. Koch knew Adolf Erik Nordenski because the father was an eminent scientist and was known in scientific circles all around Europe. Dr. Koch recommended the travel cure, and he gave him serum in small bottles to take with him so that he could inject himself while he was on his trip. And so that's why Gustaf Nordenski started on an around the world travel cure. He considered it also a working trip. He had to pay for it. He was going to do phosphate research wherever he was and write articles. He also kept a travel diary, and some newspapers in Stockholm printed his travel diaries. And it was partially funded by his father, this round the world trip. And A.E. Adolf Erik gave him letters of introduction to meet scientists wherever he was going to land. And that meant Boston, it meant Harvard, it meant New York City, and it meant Denver. And he had specific names and specific scientists and academics that he was going to meet. I'm leaving a different photograph, wonderful photograph of the 5 Wetherell boys of Mancos Canyon. And I mentioned to you that when Gustaf was in Denver, he met all the scientists. They had a conference for him. The Swedish Americans came out to meet him. And he was told about the Wetherell collection of artifacts from Mesa Verde. The Wetherell boys, quote unquote, discovered Cliff Palace and the cliff dwellings when they were wintering cattle in Mesa Verde Canyon. And they noticed the artifacts, and a lot of other people noticed the artifacts that were there, and other people started a black market in the artifacts. And the Wetherells collected a number of things, brought them up to Denver, and had a display. And that collection, of course, is at the Denver History Museum now. At any rate, Gustaf heard about this. He saw this. He had scientists telling him, you're very close to Mancos, Colorado. You're very close to Mesa Verde. Before you leave this part of the West, you must take the train go down to Durango, take a buggy over to Mancos, and see the cliff dwellings. We will give you a letter of introduction to the Wetherells of the Alamo Ranch. And that's what he did. The very first day that Gustaf was at the ranch, he and Richard went out on horseback and looked at the canyons. And Gustaf was stunned by what he saw, because he saw abandoned cliff dwellings, the remnants of an ancient civilization that apparently no one had seriously studied. And on July 11th, he wrote a very long handwritten article, letter. This is the first page in one of the inner pages, letter to his father. And I've titled it a proposal because when you read the letter, it reads as if it's a doctoral proposal. He says, "You can't believe what I saw today, Dad." And he describes what he saw. He had done some research into anyone else that had photographed or written about it or anything else. The Wetherells, by the way, were a Quaker family, well-read, well-educated. They had a library there. And to Gustaf's enormous surprise, the first night that he arrived at the ranch, the father, Benjamin Wetherell, when he was introduced to this young man, said, "Are you by any chance the son of Adolf Erik Nordenskjold, the famous Arctic explorer?" And Gustaf could not believe that on this little ranch in rural Colorado, someone knew who his father was. They hit it off massively. They were colleagues and friends, and he was determined to do this study. So he wrote this long letter indicating how he would map everything out, catalog everything, photograph everything. And in the letter, he talks about publishing a monograph, a scientific monograph that would include his photographs, graphs, maps, etc. This would mean a change in plans. He was on his way to San Francisco and Yokohama. The father wrote back pretty quickly and said, "This sounds like a great proposal, son. By all means, let's do this. How long do you anticipate it will take?" He said 6 to 8 weeks. So that's how that decision was made. And the project then was research, serious research, using scientific methods. He is one who taught the Wetherells shovels and brushes to brush off the dirt from artifacts uncovered by teaspoon kind of digging, and careful documentation. And with the image and desire to end up with a serious publication, this is one of Gustaf's most beautiful photographs. That's John Wetherell. You have to look at it closely to find the figure almost in the center of the image in a cliff dwelling, and that's, of course, the summer of 1891. Another thing Gustaf did was in every cliff dwelling, he imagined a ground plan. This took some imagination to do. So here's his rough field sketch of Cliff Palace, where everything is. And of course, then all the numbers are his numbers, so that he could document what was where and describe what was where. And here's one of his photographs of two-story house. You have to look for a minute to find a two-story house, because he also gives us the very top profile there, and the trees above, and the the iron stains drifting down the rocks. He did a lot of cross sections. This is one that he included in a letter that he sent to his father, a cross section of spruce tree house. And many of us have been out to spruce tree house. So what he gives us is this cross section, and he shows us the trees on the top of the mesa, a couple of Native Americans up there, one dropping a kind of plumb line down to the people below him, and an intimation of the structures and a pile of stones below. But it's a field sketch, a cross-section sketch of all that. He did another act of aerial imagination by doing this map of Mesa Verde. He traversed the Montezuma Valley, the Mancos area, the Alamo Ranch area, Mesa Verde, enough that he took enough field notes to be able to, with imagination, do this beautiful map. This is appears in the book, and on the right-hand side is his table of contents. The secondary goal was to collect enough artifacts to create an image of this civilization that abandoned the. He kept careful of everything that he identified and photographed so that anybody could return to those exact same places that he put the coordinates in, where you could find it. He photographed everything, and he talked about the direction from which he photographed things. And I'm just including these two bowls that are in the collection in the Museum of Cultures in Helsinki. And I want you to notice the ceramic pattern on the bowl on the left and the right, the interior pattern, but the broken cross symbol on the bowl on the right. Those of you know your archaeology know that that broken cross is an ancient symbol for the sun. It's been found in the artifacts of many different civilizations. And there's a Swedish word for this that existed before these discoveries, and it's hakkors, Hakkors, meaning broken cross. Gustaf he found enough examples of this that he started signing his letters and putting the broken cross at the bottom of the letter. And you'll see why this was so important to him and why his family realized it was important to him in a later slide. I do have to mention, I've written some articles for the paper about the history of that symbol and the co-opting of that symbol with a twist by the Nazis in World War II to become Hitler's symbol for the Nazi party. This is not it. This is an ancient sun symbol. Predates all of that, and they sort of spoiled it for all of us. Well, in July, Gustaf arrived in Mancos, and he arrived at the Alamo Ranch, and very quickly after getting his father's approval to do this serious study, he hired the Wetherill boys to work with him, and word got out of what he was doing. And he began shipping first just one or two crates with a few artifacts in them to New York City to go transatlantically to Sweden, to the University of Sweden for a museum collection. Well, rumors got out about a foreigner traipsing around Indian lands, trespassing, destroying ruins, removing artifacts. These rumors got pretty vicious, and they appeared in the paper. I'll show you one article in a moment. But this is the cowboy portrait taken by Frank Gonner, who's one of my heroes in Durango's history. He had a studio in a couple of different locations in downtown Durango, and this was a studio backdrop of Frank Gonner's. You can see it in other photographs of his that he did. And Gustaf had bought clothes for his expedition at the Great Mercantile. He bought work pants out of doors and riding horseback, and this rather odd hat, not quite a cowboy hat. At any rate, the Nordenski family refers to this portrait as the cowboy portrait of young Gustaf. The town is divided about what Gustaf and the Wetherells were doing out in Mesa Verde and in the canyons. And I'm just using this photograph of the Strater Hotel. It's going to figure prominently in this story. There were supporters of Gustaf, Ben Ritter, his major supporter, who happened to know the secretary to the Attorney General of the United States and was in correspondence with him about the uproar. There were inflammatory news reports. There were calls for his arrest. There were calls that said in the newspaper he ought to be lynched. And the plaintiff that made the formal claim against Gustaf and what he was doing was the US Indian agent, Charles Bartholomew. He was egged on apparently by some tribespeople, and a formal complaint was lodged against him. And the trial date I'll get to that in a second. There was a trial judge, Cyrus Newcomb. The prosecution was the US attorney in Denver, John Fleming. The city attorney here, Reese McCloskey, and the defense attorney was Adair Wilson. And I've already mentioned Ben Rutter, who's a real hero of mine, who worked for the US Land Office. Gustaf had a circle of friends who were educated, and he explained the scientific purpose of his book and his research and the collection, and they understood that. But the black market was thriving in artifacts even then, and that was the chief objection to what Gustaf was doing. He was cutting into the black market. Here's a newspaper account. He is under arrest. And the subhead reads, Baron Nordenski arrested, charged with devastating, reading this is the News, September 19th, 1891. This is the telegram that the US Attorney Fleming forwarded, and in which he says the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, this is to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, this is in Washington, and in Colorado, one Nordenski, alleged baron, charged with devastating the ruins, et cetera, et cetera. Down on the bottom part, I'm not going to read it, but the only thing they found that could be used as a charge against what Nordenski was doing was an old law about trespassing. There were no laws at the time about collecting artifacts, about removing things from walls of ruins or anything else. No laws at the time, and the Nordenski case was critical to the passage then later, 15 years later, of two key pieces of legislation. So no law was directly applicable. So Fleming and his cohorts came up with this 2134 trespass thing. And Gustaf had been warned about this possibility, and he was told he needed to get a pass to go onto the Indian reservation areas. He had to get that at Fort Lewis. He went there, he wrote about it. He had this pass from the lieutenant there, so he was covered in all of this. Well, he was arrested on the 17th of September when he came into town with the Wetherell boys with a couple of crates of artifacts to be dropped off at the railroad station to be shipped to New York and then to Sweden. Before he was taken to jail, he stopped at the telegraph and telegraphed his father, sent a telegraph to his father. And just notice this, it says Durango, Colorado. There's the date, 17th of September, 1891. And it's to Nordenski, Stockholm, Sweden. And then it's a 6-word telegram, much trouble, some expense, no danger, Gustaf. 6 words. You're the father and you're the mother back in Sweden, and you get this telegram. All he says is much trouble, some expense, no danger. He's just been arrested, and there's a huge bond that's going to be a problem in a very short order of time. The other thing that astonished me, and when I came across, and when I turned the page and saw the original telegram, I burst into tears because there it was. And I also noted that it was in English. He wrote this in English, and he was functioning in English all the time. So he's under stress. He's been arrested. They're going to put him in jail, and he sends a 6-word English version telegram to his father. Well, the jail had burned down 2 years prior. So he had one night in jail at the Strater Hotel. And if you go to the Strater today, and if you want to stay in room 323, which is the room that he stayed in whenever he came to town, you can stay there. And there's a nice plaque up there and a photograph of Gustaf, absolutely memorable. And that photograph is another Frank Gonner photograph of the Strater Hotel in that time period. And there's another one of Gustaf's letters with another drawing, another cross section of the cliff dwelling. So he stayed one night in hotel. This rather hefty bond was placed on him. He telegraphed his father. He got the money to get himself out of jail, get himself a lawyer, Adair Wilson, and prepare for this trial. Well, this became an international incident because the answer to the question why is because Gustaf was this young Swedish scientist with tuberculosis on a travel tour in the American Southwest. He's arrested and put in jail, and he's going to come up on charges of trespass. And he's the son of this very famous explorer in Sweden who's known all over Europe. And again, he's second in fame only to the King of Sweden. So President Harrison's cabinet became involved, partly because of the fame quotient in this, and because Ben Ritter was a close friend of the secretary to the US Attorney General, and he got the secretaries of state and the secretaries of interior and the commissioner of Indian Affairs. He got them all involved in this, and telegrams were going back and forth from Sweden to Durango, Durango to Sweden. New York got involved. The US attorney in Denver, the US Indian agent who lived in Ignacio, the one who brought the charges. And of course, in Sweden, the prime minister had some telegrams on this subject, the foreign secretary. And in the United States, the minister, the consul at the Swedish embassy, these telegrams are fascinating, and we had access to all that stuff to write the biography. This is a fake photograph. I just needed a photograph of white men in suits that look prominent and interesting to serve the purpose of this slide. But this became an international incident. International Herald Tribune, particularly, that was the American paper that covered this regularly. The trial was set for Monday, October 5th, 1891, here in Durango. And here is another wonderful photograph by Frank Gonner. We have this great photographic record of our town. You can see what we now call the Burns Bank on the left-hand side, the Wells Building on the right-hand side. Way down the street with the tower is the Strater Hotel. So the trial is set for October 5th, 1891. Gustaf has his attorney, he's ready. Fleming has come down from Denver to do this. People are expecting a mob at the trial scene. Well, that doesn't happen. And I hate to tell you, I wound everybody up to this fabulous climax, the trial by jury and all of that kind of stuff. Bartholomew, the Indian agent, and his cohorts didn't show up. They didn't answer the subpoena that was issued for them. They just didn't show up. So only the defense was there, plus the trial judge. And so everything was dismissed because the plaintiff did not show up. And that's very anticlimactic, but that's how history is. Gustaf went to the telegraph agency, and he sent this short telegram to his father. Case dismissed, all right. Gustaf, again, pretend you're Gustaf's father and mother, waiting to hear what's happening. Okay, that suddenly just vanished. It disappeared. As I already said, there were no laws against what he was doing and what everyone who was out there looting and stealing and swiping things and selling things like a ceramic vase for maybe 40 cents, a human skull for perhaps $1, a sandal for perhaps 10 cents. And on the fireplaces and on the shelves of Durango homes all over Durango, there were all kinds of these artifacts from Mesa Verde, because there was a thriving business going on there. All right. The trial is over, case dismissed. What Gustaf did, first of all, his father begged him to come home. He said, I'm not coming home yet, I have more work to do. He resumed his research. There were more things he wanted to photograph, and he re-photographed everything he had already photographed. There are some 110 photographs in his photographic collection, and the image, the graphic on the right, is the cover of his journal, where he listed exact locations for every photograph he took. He says, spells America with a K, 1891, and there's again another different and very beautiful image of his. So that's the first thing that he did, and he did that mostly with Richard and with Al Wetherill. Then he said to himself, and other people had said to him, you can't leave America unless you go down to Grand Canyon. You have to see Grand Canyon. You're a geologist. You're a mineralogist. So he and Al planned a November-December horseback trip to the bottom of Grand Canyon and back, in which Gustaf collected rock samples almost entirely and photographed the pueblos. And I hope you can see the photograph of Al and one of the citizens of one of the pueblos to the right. And of course, the left is a contemporary photograph of Mesa Verde. In January, he spent Christmas with the Wetherills at the ranch, but in January, he decided to return to Sweden, and his goals then were to continue the research, seriously get down to writing, redrawing the field study maps, the cross sections, the ground plans. He spent a whole year preparing for the publication, and the book, The Cliff Dwellers of Mesa Verde, came out in 1893, published by P.A. Norstedt and Sons in Stockholm. They are still in business. They are still a serious academic publishing company. It was published in Swedish and in English, as I've already said. And there's the Cliff Palace map that appears in the book. His personal life, I'm going to just touch on this. When he came back, his TB was in remission. As it turns out, being in the Southwest for that long summer, rigorous summer in a high, dry climate was good for him. And he became engaged. This is the engagement photo that was taken of Anna Rudolfina Schmidt and Gustaf in 1893. They set a marriage date. He continued his studies. He was one of the first people to take micro photographs of snow crystals and publish an article on them. He was a busy researcher. And the wedding date was set for October 4th, 1893. And on the left, this was another one of those discoveries in, this was out at the Anasazi Heritage Center. And this was a very exciting moment to turn a page. And there's the invitation to the wedding addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Wetherill from Adolf Erik Nordenskiöld and his wife for the marriage of Gustaf and Anna, and also listing the names of her father and mother. Her father, by the way, was a partner with Alfred Nobel of the Nobel Peace Prize. So they were prominent scientific families. This is a picture that I've inserted of the young Gustaf and Anna's apartment in Stockholm. Look at it carefully, and you will see at least two photographs, Gustaf's photographs of the cliff dwellings on the wall, a sequence of Native American baskets that are resting on the ledge, and one off to the left. When he studied and drew the ceramics at Mesa Verde, he copied the patterns, and he wrote one chapter on the meander patterns and the other patterns, these abstract geometrical patterns that the ancestral Puebloans used in their artwork. And he had someone recreate that on his dining room tablecloth. Otherwise, it's a very Swedish looking room with the tiled walls and the fireplace there. Now, I have a blank slide here to pause and say, this is the saddest part of the story. His TB returned. He became very ill in the year after his wedding and the next year. So ill that he died prematurely at age 26. And this premature death was another tragedy in the family. I put his birth date, I've repeated it, June 29th, 1868, death date, June 6th, 1895, or 3 weeks before his 27th birthday. And that's the obituary that ran in the Stockholm paper. And that's the obituary card that was printed with his birth and death dates on it. The photograph taken when he was probably 25 or 26. The tragedy of this early death of a young man with so much promise. He was an extremely hard worker. And when he was ill, before he left on the travel cure, he worked very hard. He had a regimen where he was studying every day, and anyone who's in the sciences knows how difficult you have to set out projects, and you have to pay attention to them every single day, and you have to keep journals, and you have to keep records, and he was absolutely dedicated to what he was doing, and had promised for the future. His father had hoped that he would head an expedition to Antarctica and would be the first person to reach Antarctica on a formal scientific expedition. Well, that, of course, fell into the hands of other people. When I first encountered the story of Nordenskjold, he died at the age that my son was at the time. And I went out to Mesa Verde and saw the exhibition of his photographs out there, and read this short version and the fact that he died at age 26. And it was just heartbreaking to read that story. And that's why I wanted to learn more about it. And I'm a Finn American, so I have a Nordic background, and I was really interested in all of that. At any rate, we're going to slip into this after effect now. He is buried in this church cemetery, Västerlångkyrka Cemetery. That's his gravestone. And I've prepared you to see this gravestone with two symbols on it, a Christian cross at the top and what looks like a Nazi symbol at the bottom. It is not. It is the Hakkors, or broken cross, ancient symbol of the sun, which he encountered here in the Southwest, which he used to sign his letters. He found it on bowls and other things, and his family wisely chose to put these two symbols on his gravestone. The picture of the home at the bottom, that's the summer home in Dalbjo. It is south of Stockholm in the archipelago. And my husband and I went and spent a considerable amount of time there, and we met some of the Nordenskjold people while we were down there, and went to the cemetery and paid tribute. Now, I'm going to have a short epilogue here. I have time to do this because there's a human and a scientific legacy to be acknowledged that is worth acknowledging, and this too has moved me immensely. When young Gustaf died, he had been married about 2 years, and he and his wife Anna had a daughter, Eva Emalia. She was born on September 15th, 1894. When Eva Emalia, and that's her picture there, when she grew up, she's a young woman here, a young Swedish woman, she married a scientist. She married Dr. Olof Arrhenius, a plant ecologist. And the two of them had 7 children. I commented earlier this afternoon to Gay that it sounds like I'm starting to tell a fairy story. A wonderful fairy story. And they had 7 children, and the oldest grandson, and that's what I'm doing here. And the oldest grandson is pictured in the lower right, and his name is Gustaf, named after his grandfather, Gustaf Nordenskjold. His name is Dr. Gustaf Arrhenius, and he was born in 1922, educated at the University of Uppsala. Now I'm going to carry on with him. Dr. Gustaf Arrhenius, grandson of our Gustaf, is a paleoceanographer. His specialties are geochemistry, cosmochemistry, astrobiology. And because he studied geology at the University of Uppsala, got a postdoc assignment to Scripps Institute in California, completed his doctoral studies, and essentially was studying the history of the Earth by doing deep core boring and studying the ocean's deep cores. That's why I say that. But I put up astrobiology because if you look up his obituary, he just died 2 years ago. He also became head of the NASA moon rock study. When the space capsules came back with moon rocks, who did they turn to do the serious scientific study of those moon rocks but Dr. Gustaf Arrhenius? And this is a picture that I took of him when we visited him and his wife, Jenny, at Scripps Institute in La Jolla, and to our enormous good fortune and good luck, when we first inquired, I sent a pretty simple letter saying I'm extremely interested in your grandfather, Gustaf Nordenski, and I've written a number of articles here for the Durango Herald and other things, and I would like to do, and we visited Mesa Verde, would like to do more. Do you have any documents or artifacts, or could we interview you? He emailed, that was a real email, he emailed back right away, and he said, I happen to have all the letters that he wrote to his mother, his father, his brother, his cousin, his colleagues. And I have quite a number of artifacts. They will be going to the University of Stockholm archives somewhat soon. So if you want to see them all, come soon. We did. We went immediately. Well, that's another story for another time. Absolutely wonderful story. But I want to say this. Here are two pictures of two young men in their 20s. On the left, you've seen the graduation photo of Gustaf Nordenski at age 22, graduating from the University of Uppsala. He happens to be the grandfather of the young man in the right portrait, who is Gustaf Arrhenius, who is 25 in this picture, also a graduate of the University of Uppsala, but on his way to doctoral work in California. Gustaf Nordenski had ambitions as a scientist. He could see things that needed study, see things that needed attention. And that scientific approach to life, the care and the attention that it takes to be a scientist came down to his grandson, Gustaf Arrhenius, who became a paleoceanographer, head of the NASA moon rock study. And there's a wonderful correlation here that I just have to celebrate and name. The Nordenski legacy out at Mesa Verde. When you go out to Mesa Verde, I hope you will ask every single ranger and guide that you encounter, ask if the particular cliff dwelling that you're looking at was named and identified by Gustaf Nordenski, because he identified 27 sites, and those 27 designations remain. The only act of desecration he performed was to carve this little thing that you can see here, NO21, that's Spruce Treehouse, and little number 21 for Spruce Treehouse. You're looking, I think, at Longhouse here. At any rate, he identified 27 sites in the preparation for his scientific monograph. He named Chapin and Wetherell mesas. He named Kodak House for his camera and his equipment. And here's his photograph of Kodak House. He, at the end of the day, when they were doing their work, they would go back there. They built a little very simple ladder. He climbed up with all his photographic equipment and stored it deep in the cool confines of that cliff dwelling and named it Kodak House. And how he came into possession of a small box Kodak camera, which had only recently been invented, is another story for another time. So this is the end of the talk for today. And there is Gustaf's photograph of Al Wetherell sitting way out on an outcropping out at Mesa Verde, one of my very favorite photographs of him. And I'm hoping that there are some questions out there that are going to come in soon.
All right, thank you so much, Judith. I apologize for the sound problem we're having. We have not such a great microphone. So what I'm going to ask is if you have questions, please click on the little Q&A icon and type them in, and I will get your question to Judith. And we'll take a few seconds of a delay while we speak. Oh, okay. Judith can't hear me. That's okay. We'll,
I can barely hear you.
okay. Yeah, we'll get the questions to her. So if you have questions, type them in the Q&A, please, and we'll get them to Judith.
Right. Susan, you sound like you're out in Mancus shouting at me. Okay. We're playing relay race in here. Did Gustaf ever do any work in what is now known? It's very likely. There were, at the time in 1891, those borders of reservation area, Indian area, and federal lands, all those borders were very loose, very undefined, and it's what is now Ute Mountain Ute is it's very possible that he was there. By the way, the Wetherells had tribal permission to winter their cattle in the canyon, up around the cliff dwellings and everywhere. They had very good relationships with the tribes at the time. They were Quakers, they were respectful. That's one reason they could collect things, but more importantly, they were ranchers.
Okay, did that answer your question, Jill? Okay, we've got another one.
Were there any human remains in the Nordenski collection and have they been returned? Two-part question, really important question. Yes, there were. And again, one of the more important sentences in our book is that Gustaf Nordenski was guilty of living in his own time. And that was a time when not only pots and sandals were withdrawn from what appeared to be abandoned sites, but so were human remains. He photographed the exact locations of wherever he found them. He took 12 bodies, skeletal bodies, back to Sweden, and he had forensic archaeologists study those, and all of that's documented in his book. And it was not controversial at the time. It certainly is controversial now. That kind of thing cannot happen now. And the second part of the question is, have they been repatriated? And the answer is yes. The Nordenski collection, for complicated reasons, didn't end up in Stockholm, but ended up in Helsinki. And the Nordenski collection was the foundation collection of Finland's Natural History Museum. And 2 years ago, the president of Finland, on behalf of the Finnish people and the Natural History Museum, returned all of those human remains to the United States. Those of you who remember that I have been a political cartoonist, I did a political cartoon about that because I found it ironic that the president of Finland made a rather elaborate presentation. They were the first country in the international scheme of things to do this, to return remains to the United States to be returned to the tribes. And of course, he had to give this symbolic offering to the then president in 2019. And I found that ironic because the then president did not know what it was all about, but it was very significant. And those remains have been repatriated. No one knows to where. That is the tribe's business. She says hi. Well,
wonderful presentation. Has the Nordenski, has it been returned to Mesa Verde?
The collection.
Has the collection been
Ah.
returned?
Hi, Kathy. Kathy Gibson, great granddaughter of Frank Gonner, and a friend and colleague. When I give talks about Gustaf Nordenski and Italy, that's one of the very first questions that's asked. Why is the Nordenski collection in Finland, and when is it going to be returned to the United States? It stays in Finland. When we wrote our biography of Gustaf Nordenski, one of the most important interviews that I had was a curator out at Mesa Verde, who then said to me, Finland should keep this collection. We have no place for it here. This is before they got their new buildings and all that kind of stuff. And besides, everything that's in that collection, we have duplicates of here at Mesa Verde. So once the remains were returned and repatriated to the United States, so that was sort of the end of that. The Finns are very proud of the Nordenski collection. This was an early anthropological study, significant in its thoroughness. It was the centerpiece of the beginnings of their natural history museum, and they're very proud of it. Those things are not coming back here, and as the Mesa Verde curator said, there are duplicates out here at Mesa Verde. By the way, among the things that he collected were plant samples to give a portrait of what the landscape was like, soil samples, and animal dung, a variety of kinds. He wasn't just going to take pots and samples. He wanted to portray a civilization. And you can go there, you can go to Helsinki. Everything is housed and filed in air-conditioned comfort and easily accessible by a state-of-the-art computer system.
I think you answered this, but we have another question that says, now that Mesa Verde has the artifacts back.
Well, there probably are. There are probably Americans who think, hey, that belongs here. It shouldn't be in a foreign country, bringing up the old, it's a foreign country, it's a European country, and it doesn't belong there and everything else. It's that old argument. So I doubt that that is ever, I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime. I don't have a lot of years left, but I doubt that.
Any other questions? I think we've got them all. And if you do think of any more questions, please shoot us an email at info@animusmuseum.org, and we'll be sure to get that question to Judith and an answer back to you. So please feel free to do that. No more questions, then a little bit of shameless self-promotion. We're really excited to announce that the Animus Museum will be open to the public starting Tuesday, November 30th, on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So stay tuned for more information about that, but we're excited about that one. Next month, on our second Saturday seminar series, join us. We're very excited to have Kip Boyd, the official, unofficial historian of St. Mark's Episcopal Church here in Durango. He is going to share with us in a two-part episode the history of St. Mark's as it relates to the bankers of St. Mark's. And it's, from what I hear, it's a pretty interesting story. Also, on December 12th, we are going to have an open house at the Joy Cabin in the Peterson House here on the property of the museum. So please come visit and say hi and maybe have some kind of holiday refreshments. Oh, and that is going to be from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. But definitely watch our Facebook page, watch our Instagram, watch our newsletters, watch our e-blasts, watch our website, and we'll get more information out to you as we know. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Judith, for what a wonderful presentation. Who knew such exciting stuff had gone on here in Durango? And if you want to see more programming like this, please support us. Use the donate button on our website or become a member. And you can do that on our website at animusmuseum.org. And with no further ado, thank you all very much, and we'll see you next month. Have a good day.